Let me just thank everybody at MOCA for arranging the exhibition and all the attendant things. Thanks to Kathleen, all the staff and all the crew there who've been remarkable, world-class. They did everything I could possibly ask them to do. I'm going to set my timer for 52 minutes. And at 52 minutes, I'll stop. And we'll see whether we want to start having questions or whether there's an alternative. So it's starting now. This is 1966 for me. I first saw Walker Evans' portrait of a sharecropper's wife made in 1938, which was only 27 years, made only 27 years before I saw it. And these photographs, the photographs that Evans took in 1938, I'll show you another, seem to me about as accomplished and perfect as photography could be. So I'm going to talk about my convictions and my criteria for what I do in relation to certain other things. These convictions and these criteria apply to me only. They're not applicable to anyone else unless someone else wishes them to apply to themselves. I think artistic criteria are all voluntary, even though they're quite binding once you've accepted them. Evans' book, American Photographs, which is also published in 1938, seems to me to be the Bible, the Quran, the Torah of photography. Everything in it is, there's everything you need to know about photography can be learned from it, and I've been studying it for a long time. But what really impressed me in 1965, before I was really conscious of it or intellectually conscious of it, was that its perfection and its remarkable achievement didn't open any doors for me. It closed them. And I didn't realize at the time what doors exactly were closed, but I knew they were closed. And I knew there was something there that I could never do. So what was it, I wondered, for quite a while, that was missing? Or what Evans might have left undone, or did not succeed in doing. Not something easy to find. And by the way, I wasn't trying to poke holes in anything Evans did, or criticize anything Evans or anybody else who I admire did. I don't criticize other art, I just try and learn from it. And I wasn't looking to find fault with Evans, I was just trying to find out whether there was anything behind that door, or whether that door had a little chink in it that I could get through. Evans's work, of course, was made for publication in books. Here's two sequential pages from American Photographs, and I'll show you two more to get a sense of how Evans also used montage, which is a very cinematic concept, to construct American photographs, something that's been studied now for the last, 80 years. This is obviously a little sequence about the automobile. What had Evans not done? Here's an exhibition, a shot of an exhibition of one of his exhibitions. I think it's at the Museum of Modern Art, but it doesn't much matter. And here's another shot of the same show. You notice that in this picture, somebody, I could guess it could be a curator, has made what we used to laughingly call a blow-up of a photo, of one of his photos. This one. And it's curious why this would have happened, because the exhibition is not of blow-ups of Evans' negatives, it's of the prints he actually made. But it shows you what I found. The one thing that Evans, and in a sense everyone up to that point, and Evans kind of represents everyone in this sense, when he wasn't interested in, didn't think about, didn't accomplish, and that's this. The fact that photographs were not considered something that could hang on a wall and be physically present the way other pictures in our tradition have done for close to 1,000 years. Of course, I show you I guess Las Meninas by Velázquez is about the same thing as Ali made Dorot's portrait by Evans. It's a sine qua non of what the thing could be. So I had, as Kathleen said, I had been painting and drawing as a child for a long, long time, of course, by the time I started thinking about this. And it only occurred to me after a certain amount of reflection, some kind of tormented reflection, some delayed reflections, that this could be a dimension of photography that could be authentically engaged in, not for novelty's sake, not to, compete with Walker Evans, none of that, but to unlock an energy, a kind of radiation, an energy inside of what photography as a technology, and therefore as an art form, could be. And that was its ability to make itself present in this sort of a way. So, the tableau. This is a French term which I used a lot, and we sort of have to use because the French have a more precise term for this. Autonomous, imposing, emphatically visible representation of a something that shows us not only what it shows us itself showing it to us. We don't only look at what's in the painting, we look at the painting as a phenomenon itself. It is visible, and what it makes visible is visible. And it does that in a way that is physical, and physical that confronts us in real life when we see it in a room, like all these people are, in a way that nothing else does. And there are many things that flow or radiate out from that. I won't enumerate them, but we'll touch on them, I suppose. In order to make a shift between the kind of photography that Evans did and something different, other things had to come into play. And the first or next most important thing was the cinema for me, and I'm sure for many other people. The cinema is a place in which photography also, cinema is an institution in which photography also takes place. People don't think about photography taking place in the cinema, they think about filmmaking taking place in the cinema, but photography takes place in the cinema. So what I've always been drawn to is not the cinema itself, but the photography of cinema. And I think that those people who made those photographs are some of the most important photographers of the 20th century. I'll show you just a couple of quick examples, and I need my glasses for this. These are stills. This is Germany Year Zero, Roberto Rossellini, photographed by Robert Juillard in 1948. This is Los Olvidados, made in Mexico in 1950, photographed by Gabriel Figueroa, directed by Louis Buñuel. This is The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, made in 1972 and photographed by Michael Ballhaus, directed by Rainer Werner Fassbinder. And this is The White Ribbon, photographed by Christian Berger in 2009, directed by Michael Haneke. These photographers, and I think you can see these photographs, are the equal of many other photographs that we might just call photographs. And they just appear for 1/24 of a second in a film. The cinema unlocked something about the making of photographs. The complexity, technical complexity, the intrepidness of solving problems, the ability to collaborate, the access, the giving yourself permission of access to other resources, then where traditional all became kind of touchstones for a way out of classical photography and into a method that would allow me to create some kind of picture that could hang on a wall. And here you have example of that kind of effect. This is from an exhibition I made about 10 years ago in Austria, a particularly nice one, and so I think it gives you a good sense of, the impact and also the decorativeness, the decorative element, which of course is one of the great provinces of painting as well. Transparencies, prints. Another interesting placement of the picture. This is called Cyclist, made in the 1990s. So, in the 70s, I began to put that to use. bringing in other elements of production, manufacturing, or making, and referencing and so on with pictures like this made in 1979. Here you can see it on the wall, along with a couple of other older pictures from the 1970s. You know, everybody knows about this who knows about me. And it's partly my fault by emphasizing the relationship between Manet's Bar at the Folie Bergère and my picture of women in the 70s. But the fact is, it's true. I'd seen this painting many, many times when I lived in London. It had a major effect on me, not because I thought it was the best painting in the world or anything like that, because that's not going to help me to find the best painting. Some energy radiated from this picture that allowed me to think about photography in a way I wanted to think about it, or it allowed me to think about photography in a way I didn't know I wanted to think about it until I started spending time with pictures like this. The problem is, when I use the word tableau and I talk about my pictures, people tended to think that all my pictures then relate to 19th century French paintings. And that's been going on for the last 20, 30, 40 years. My own fault, but nevertheless, it's a bit of a limitation because the tableau is this also. Tableau is this also. Tableau is this. It's also this. The anti-tableau is also part of the tradition, just like the anti-painting is part of the painting tradition. So, I believe that my pictorial work, or my let's call it figurative art, is it's a post-abstract figuration. And I think that all ambitious and interesting figuration now is post-abstract art. We have learned from abstract art how to look in a way that we were never that conscious of before, even though all the secrets of abstract art were hidden in older art, as people like Frank Stella had taught us in the 1970s in his remarkable series of lectures, Working Space, in which he tried to find ways in which abstract art could equal the spatial complexity and narrativity of previous figurative art. But what he didn't talk about was the fact that there was going to be a new figurativity after abstract art. And I think that's where we come in, that's where I come in. So, cinematography, which what I began to call my work cinematography around this time, or at least thought about it before actually saying it, led me to have certain kinds of freedoms. And what I'll do is look at some pictures and describe some of the freedoms that I think I was able to realize for myself or got realized for me. This is called The Thinker. It was made in the 80s, and this is part of a series, sort of a thread, I guess you'd call it, a thread that runs through what I do. It's a combination of things that might seem incompatible or contradictory. That is, imaginary elements, literary elements, random elements, combined with rather strict photographic treatment. If a painter can start his painting or her painting from anywhere, that is, a random insight, something that they read, something that they daydreamed, etc., etc. And if a composer can do that, and a poet can do that, and any other artist can do that, then I thought, there's no reason why I can't do that. And is photography somehow foreclosed from that kind of treatment because of its social obligation, from, coming from its origins, its social obligation to record things, record appearances for practical purposes, and even for aesthetic purposes. It seemed to me that there was nothing in photography as such that precluded that. In the 1920s, people thought about photography as the essential photography, the Walker Evans kind of photography, as something fundamentally new, culturally new, artistically new, historically new. It had only been invented 70 or 80 years before. It was considered new, that difference, that way that photography was different from any other kind of rendering, and it looked different, felt different, did different things. But by about 1966, and I didn't put it in these terms at the time, it was old. That photography had aged. That newness didn't exist anymore. It wasn't taking photography anywhere anymore. And again, this is my opinion and my conviction about the situation. It wasn't taking photography anywhere anymore to think of itself as new. It would be better to think of itself as old. And when it was old, then there was the only thing that could be new was something that was not it. And all the things that had sort of been foreclosed, not ferociously or in any abhorrent sort of way, but just as by convention, by consensus, that had been foreclosed, or at least photographers had been discouraged to deal with, seemed to be the areas that could be looked at. That is, the shadow zones of photography, the exclusions of the photographic canon. It was, by this point, pretty obvious that the two great exclusions were the kind of photography made in films and the tableau framework. So, this is kind of freedom I just simply claimed. And I have to admit that I've always done exactly what I wanted my whole life long. It may be because I've had an easy life and had certain advantages, but nevertheless, I did. And one of the reasons I did that probably is because in my youth, I did look at art seriously as a child, through reproduction mostly, and I responded to it, and I thought I understood it without being that intellectual about it. And I knew that these people who'd made these pictures did what they wanted somehow, because there was only one of them, and there was only one Bruegel, and there was only one so-and-so, and that person became himself by some attitude. That's what we call artistic freedom. And artistic freedom does exist, at least in certain kinds of societies that permit people to make choices for themselves within the framework of criteria that apply to that choice. We can't make choices, personal choices about the law, for example. We can't pick which laws we're going to obey and what we can't. But we can make choices within certain criteria, with in a sense, an ultimate liberty. And it seemed to me I was at liberty to do anything I wanted along those lines. So I could start anywhere. And I began to start anywhere. I'm going to show you a few anywheres quickly, and say a couple of things about maybe why that anywhere emerged, but also what anywhere it was. In the 1600s, Albrecht Dürer had made this plan for a sculpture, a monument to the defeated peasants in the wars of the 1600s in Germany. And it was never built, of course. And we don't know whether it was a monument to the victors to celebrate the defeat of their enemies, that is, the defeated peasant with a sword in his back, or whether it was a monument to celebrate or mourn the defeat of the other side. We don't know. And that ambiguity makes the sculpture modern. That's one of the things that makes the sculpture ultimately modern, and why, even if you built this today, it would be modern. So I thought, great, Dürer is fantastic. I want to do something about it. It was never built. It doesn't really exist. I have a chance. I'm always looking for a chance. All I'm looking for is a chance to make the next picture. So I reduced it to a similar character. There are no peasants in Canada, I believe, but there are people like him. And Dürer's column has been reduced to a cinder block, which is what a lot of buildings are made from, a piece of curbstone, which is streets, a piece of tree stump that has been cut down. So it's a minimized and reduced version of Dürer's monument. And he sits atop a hillside looking west over Vancouver. It could be any city, of course, but it had to be a whole city. So there's a certain kind of cosmic or totalizing sense of his vision. So that's a completely imaginary subject. He doesn't exist. He can't be alive. He has a sword in his back. He doesn't have a sword in his back. All these things are completely unknowable, but nevertheless, they are present to you visually, and you are compelled to recognize that you see them. Except for the sword in his back, I suppose, this could be a completely straight photograph of a man sitting on a tree trunk. So it's a combination of something completely unreal and personal to me, and carried out in a completely objective photographic sense, leading, I think, to something else. This is in the exhibition. It was made in the early 90s. It's called Dead Troops Talk, a vision after an ambush of a Red Army patrol near Mokor, Afghanistan, winter 1986. It was done in 1991, finished in 1992. Another completely imaginary moment. I won't take the time, because I don't think I have it, to explain all the ins and outs of why I wanted to do a picture of a Soviet patrol having got ambushed in Afghanistan and having fallen to their enemies in the lull after the battle, when their mujahideen are collecting their weapons and any other things they want to take away. They suddenly seem to come to life and begin conversations amongst themselves. I won't say more than that. You can see that it's something that can't happen, and yet the stakes I'm playing for is that not only you know it can't happen, visually it is happening in front of your eyes. It's also maybe worth mentioning a little about it, because it's the first picture, one of the first pictures I made using the new digital technologies in the early 90s. I've been watching them for a long time and waiting to be able to use them, because photography in the traditional sense is what can be captured on one piece of film. And that is the fundamental condition of photography, which I do not challenge. But technologies have allowed us to be able to, for the first time in a convincing fashion, to combine pieces of film such that the combination cannot be seen. That's a freeing of photography from the single piece of film. And I've used that in any number of ways, and I'll get to some of those as we go along. But again, the starting point was something imaginary, which I will not go into because I don't have time. Here's how it looks in an exhibition. Both of these pictures are in the show here. A couple of details. There's a lot of gore, of course, and that was the relationship to that as part of the subject. 1993, I made A Sudden Gust of Wind, which was inspired by a woodcut by Hokusai, which was made in the 1930s. I won't show it for the moment because I forgot to put it into this PowerPoint thing, but anyway, it looks similar. I saw the Hokusai in a bookstore, realized it was ultimately photographic, and wanted to make my own version of it. Someone asked me, I think it was Robert Enright in the interview we did in the catalog, whether I would have put a Mount Fuji in the background on the left, like Hokusai did. And I said, I wouldn't put Mount Fuji in because I'm not copying Hokusai, I'm measuring the distance between Hokusai and me. That's the kind of relationship I like to have to something like Dürer or Hokusai. Ah, it is here. Sorry, I forgot that I remembered. There it is. You see, there's no Fuji. But that measurement of distance is a contradictory and unstable aspect of the artistic process, which is not really only interesting and compelling part, it's the real modern part. And I still use the word modern in the modern sense. Again, a couple of details. In Hokusai, nobody is happy about losing their hats, because hats were probably harder to come by in those days. But one of the ways I did measure the distance was make this man kind of amused by the fact that he's losing his hat, because he's not the same person who would be walking along a path in 1830. He's another person in another time, pictures in another time, and these pictures do have that sense of marking the time distinction from their origins. I'm not copying them, and I'm not doing homages. I'm taking the measure of the relationship. Flooded Grave is another one of the pictures that used digital technology pretty substantially. It had its origin in a momentary daydream of my own, which was as if, because it didn't happen to me, it was as if I were walking in a cemetery on a rainy day and happened upon an empty hole that had been freshly dug, waiting for some funeral. And it would have been full of muddy water, but for an instant, for a microsecond, for I don't know how long, the vision came that it was the ocean, and in the ocean, and the ocean was teeming with life. Very, very simple idea, obviously, and it came in the same sort of impromptu, unexpected impulse that led me to make the Afghanistan war picture. So inside, under the water of the grave, there's a segment of British Columbia ocean bottom. It's not an aquarium display. It's a replication of an actual part of the ocean bottom that was pretty carefully researched. The whole picture, despite all of its montages, is made up of documentary photographs. They're just pictures of the cemetery, pictures of the earth pile, pictures of the fish swimming around, pictures of the octopus. All those things are essentially just straight photographs combined in a certain way. So you can see that this kind of imaginary freedom, a kind of almost poetic freedom, I guess, has led me to just certain fantasies of mine that have meanings I'm not that interested in talking about. I don't even know what they are for the most part, but they do exist. Reading is also a place where things happen. I've been a reader of novels since I was a child, and have always loved to get lost in a novel, especially late at night before I go to sleep. It's like a bedtime story. I think of novels as bedtime stories for adults, really. And because it takes you away from, literature has that way of taking you away from your own world in a very unique way. First of all, you don't have to do anything. You're alone. You can be alone. You don't have to go to a museum. You don't have to do anything. It takes you away. And so I've always been a novel reader. And while I've been reading, I've had a few encounters, very much like other encounters. This was with a passage from Ralph Ellison's novel Invisible Man, published in 1954, written during the war, about a young black American who leaves the South in the 40s, I suppose, trying to make his way in part of that great migration to the North, out of the Jim Crow world and into some brighter future, which as the novel goes on, shows you doesn't really work out that well. He ends up in this basement by accident and decides to live there because he's been defeated in many, many aspects of his life. And he can't go on. So he lives in the cellar like an underground man. It's a certain Dostoevskian element in this. But as he goes, he finds some electricity in the cellar of this huge building and wires himself up some light and this and that. And he describes his obsession that takes over, where he has to have more and more light because he feels so invisible that he just doesn't know how much light it would take for him to ever become visible. So he ends up with 1,300, as Ellison says, 1,369 light bulbs in his little room. When I read this, it was so obviously photogenic, ridiculously obviously photogenic. I feel almost half ashamed of even doing it. It was so obvious. But it was compelling because of, well, for many, I hope, pretty obvious reasons. So the point being, reading is a free starting point. Of course, films, many films are start off from adaptations of novels and stories and so on. And there's a certain, I suppose, reference to that, which I'm not very interested in, but is nevertheless there. Here's the first edition of Invisible Man. And here's our hero. In 2017, and this is in the exhibition, and it's a little hard for me to talk about, so I'm going to be brief with it because you can see it for yourself at some point. I went to Turin in Italy and discovered these magnificent gardens, 3 magnificent gardens on a private estate. I'll show you the three gardens quickly. 1, 2, 3. And through a certain series of circumstances, I came to want to make a three-part picture, and I've done some pictures that are more than one panel. And it seemed possible to do something there if I could find something to happen in those gardens. So I did devise an occurrence taking place in each of the gardens that moves from left to right, or at least I will tell you in public, it moves from left to right. A lot of my pictures that have more than one part do not move left to right. There is no time, you can't make a chronological relationship between them. It's a spatial relation. But you know, I never vowed that I would always do things that way, and there are no rules, and I at one time thought there should never be a time sequence in a diptych or a triptych. It's really not pictorial. There's something anti-pictorial about it. But as I said, there are no rules. All the rules are obligatory. It's just that when you obligate yourself to them, you must follow them. But so I broke my rule. I broke my own rule and comprised something that takes place in each of these panels. I won't say anything specific about it. I'll let you have a quicker look. You may notice that the men are played by the same person as are the women. This is digital photography 001. Anybody can do it. But it is a capacity of the medium now, and therefore it's available. Center, right side. Inside of one of the important things I learned from cinematography was that in every image there is a writing. There is a writing present in the making of every image. Of course, in the cinema or the theater, the writing is obvious. It's the script. So in films, we know there's a writing in those images. But there's a writing in all images. And I learned this from studying film, I think. And I write too. For example, Dead Troops Talk began with some sort of fantasy that got verbalized as Dialogue of the Dead. So my writing was probably something like Dialogue of the Dead. Once it's verbalized, it begins to become possible to be, it begins to be possible for me to make it into a picture. But the only way to make it into a picture is to stop verbalizing it, stop narrativizing it, and begin to erase the verbalization, erase the narrativization, and begin to work pictorially. Picture making is not writing. Picture making is not literary, but it has a relationship to literature, and all art has a relationship to literature, even abstract art. So in this case, the writing simply took a slightly different form, where instead of stopping at 3 words, I maybe stopped at 25 words. So I have my own writing of this 3-part thing, this 3-part event, but I'm not going to read it to you, because I believe that what's fascinating about pictures is that the artist erases the writing they begin with. Picture making is erasing the writing that is inherent in making pictures. We erase. And once the erasure is complete, the picture exists as a visual thing that is silent. The viewer rewrites, reinvents the narrative that's been erased by the artist. But the viewer can never write it the same as I wrote it. So there'll always be that ambiguity in between my writing, which set the whole thing in motion, and your writing, which brings it back to motion after it's been stilled by me. There are any number of ways of dealing with that, and I think that this is one of the several very, very salient parts of that criteria I use. The last one, and I'll be quick with it because it's also in the exhibition, is a sort of a reprise of the idea I had when I made The Thinker, which was an imaginary monument. This is an imaginary monument too. It's called Maquette for a Monument to the Contemplation of, Maquette for a Monument to the Contemplation of the Possibility of Mending a Hole in a Sock. And she is possibly about to mend a hole in this old sock. She's in a sense, she is as imaginary a character as the thinker is. And I began making this picture by having second thoughts, or at least interesting new thoughts, about the thinker itself. And so one picture sort of led to another, which is something I don't like very much. But as I said, I don't really have control over those sorts of things. Now, I'm going to talk about the realist part of my work, because I've talked about the sort of imaginary part. And I think there are two threads. They keep crossing, and I think you can find aspects of one and the other all the time, and that's the only way I would like to have it. Like a lot of people, I was deeply impressed by Italian films of the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, that we often call neorealist. And neorealist means a new kind of realism that came out of Italy after the war, pretty much, that exploited new ways of making film. I'm going to show you 4 consecutive shots from Pier Paolo Pasolini's 1961 film Acatone, which deals with the life of a sort of ne'er-do-well of the Roman suburbs. First one. I'm not sure that you can find 4 images more perfectly made than these 4. I don't think that it could be more perfectly composed, the moment more perfectly chosen, what's going on more subtly and beautifully expressed without any emphasis, using the medium of the camera exactly as it should be used, everything. This is like the Walker Evans. It's on that same pitch. He wants to talk to somebody. It's a hot day. He's lying in the back bed of a truck which is warm. He wants an answer. Not getting an answer. You see the writing? Not getting an answer. If it was me, that's where I would have begun. Ignoring, being ignored, not getting an answer, not paying attention, ignoring him. That's the writing, and you can see it. There's the writing. Not to mention, Pasolini modeled this shot on Mantegna's Dead Christ. So not only is there literature happening here, not only is there photography at the highest pitch happening here, painting is also there. Pasolini's understanding of painting is there. He's not copying the Mantegna. You can see it's a different picture, but you know, he wants you, well, we don't know what he wants, but the point is that the presence of painting is there. That it also reiterates what I've been saying earlier. These art forms are akin. They're like sisters or brothers. They're a family. Sculpture, painting, drawing, photography, literature, they are a family, and to overemphasize the uniqueness of each of their characteristics is a great thing to do. And I think all the modernist thinkers of the 50s and 60s who emphasized, for example, the flatness of painting and its particular characteristics, all the people who talked about photography as an entirely new form of image making that was not like anything else, they were all right. I actually agree with them all that we should absolutely make our work out of the conditions of our art form and not copy any other art form. But the point is, Pasolini's not copying anything here. He's not copying painting. Neither I'm not copying painting either. I'm thinking about painting, and I'm letting painting or literature irradiate somehow me, my energy, and just responding to that irradiation. It could be anything. So in the neorealist pictures I do, or what I call near-documentary pictures, here's one from the 80s, I've tried to copy, replicate, reconstruct, whatever it is you want to call it, things I've really seen, things I witnessed. And I did witness this event in Vancouver in probably 1982, and I reconstructed it in a very faithful fashion. You know, Pasolini went and found this place. He knew the suburbs of Rome very well. He knew the area, and he knew he wanted to work in a certain area. He chose the area because the area worked for him. Look at the buildings in the background, and look at look at the landscape that's happening here. This new urbanism of the early '60s Italy. He's captured it. It's part of the image. It's also part of the story. This story has to happen on the outskirts of the city. These 4 pictures are all you really need to know about how to make films, and Bernardo Bertolucci was an assistant on this film when he was very young. That's what he said. He said, Akatoni was my film school. I learned it all there. So the point being that I saw this happen, but I didn't see it happen here. I saw it happen somewhere else. And I moved it here because the picture looked better here than it did in the place I saw it. The picture I wanted to make, the picture I discovered I wanted to make, looked better here. There it is on the wall. Bad Goods, made in 1984, is in the exhibition. Also something I witnessed, the dumping of vegetables, dumping of lettuce in an empty lot, and having that, and seeing that it being encountered by someone who may or may not need that lettuce. I think you can see the affinity between those images of Pasolini's and pictures like this. I hate to think I'm influenced by anybody, but I obviously was influenced not only the way of practicing photography, in color in this case, and you can see that in color, things become very different. But also in the interest in certain parts of the city, and I've always been interested in certain parts of the city. I'm now interested in any part of the city, but I might have been a little more interested in certain parts of the city in the 80s because, I don't know why really, but I was. So I see these as pictures that, once again, have an origin and actuality. I could have possibly photographed them if I had my camera. I'm not against photographing things with my camera if I'm carrying it, and I do sometimes, but that's not my real passion. My real passion is for composition, for making a picture that is, as I said, vehemently visible on its own as a picture, regardless of what's in it. Obviously partly because of what's in it, but also at the same time, regardless of what's in it. The Storyteller is another one, which is made very similarly to the previous two. This was in the early mid-'80s, and I was really working this way, developing this way of working as much as I could, and I was very interested in it, and the areas I was working in were convenient to me, and I was interested in what was happening in those areas. This is a huge picture. It is in the exhibition. It shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Native Canadians, Indigenous people who I did see out on a bank of an overpass like this, with a fire going early in the day, being in conversation or not, as you see. Again, I didn't like where it was. I moved it to this beautiful spot where I could photograph the underside of the Georgia Viaduct, which to me looks like a beautiful ship, a beautiful sheltering space, which is in a way a contradiction to some parts of the picture. Just a couple of details. Some people have said, oh, this picture derives from Manet's Le Déjeuner de l'Herbe, which you see some people sitting around like this. The only reason it resembles that is because of the man with his hand on his head in the middle, who actually does resemble one of the poses in Manet's painting. But I didn't tell him to do that. He was across the street from me, far away, and I couldn't communicate with him at all. At most, we had a couple of hand signals. I didn't ask him to do it, and he didn't know the Manet painting. So it was an accident. And another sort of commonplace opinion about my work is that I plan everything out in advance very carefully, and not only do I carry it out, not only do I plan it carefully, I actually execute it exactly according to the plan. That can't happen. That can never happen. A lot of things that happen in my pictures are purely accidental, and I have to simply be ready to accept them or understand them or reject them, as the case may be. I won't go further into detail about that. It's the case in every picture I've ever made. It's always a combination of what you can prepare for, what you can tell yourself you shouldn't prepare for, how you respond to having prepared for something that didn't work out, et cetera, and it goes on through the whole process. Some people are not listening to the storyteller. But that was the event. To make it as if the storyteller's story, this oral history of the indigenous people, was so enthralling and meaningful and overwhelmingly significant that no one could possibly not listen, that would be sentimental. That's not real. everybody has different reactions to things, and it's the measuring of those different reactions that makes the picture have any life to it. In 1988, I made an eviction, which was precisely that, an eviction, the family being evicted from a house and being seen from a very high angle. I'll just comment on it briefly because in this picture, unlike the previous ones, there is a combination of types of collaboration. I think of cinematography as a whole as simply collaboration and preparation. One prepares a situation, including preparing yourself to photograph, and you collaborate with whoever you need to accomplish your aims. So collaboration is not one thing. There are all kinds of collaborations. It could be collaboration with the city of Vancouver to use the street. It could be collaboration with the people who own the house to let them use their front yard. They could be even the people who live in the house, maybe collaborated with them. But just another image of it on the wall. But I'm probably collaborating with these people in one way, and I'm collaborating with these people in a totally different way. Some of the people who you see in the picture were not watching an eviction, they're watching me photograph an eviction. But the point is, you can't tell the difference. If you can't tell the difference, it doesn't matter. It becomes part of the image. And that indistinction, that illusion, it is an illusion, but art is illusion. Everything about art is illusionary. It doesn't mean it's not factual, it doesn't mean it's not true, it means it's illusionary. The grounds upon which anything appears is illusionism. And therefore there's many, many paths to the result. So although it's sort of comic to realize, and I probably shouldn't tell you this, but it's comic to realize that they were really just watching us photograph. Nevertheless, they are watching the same event. They are essentially watching the same occurrence that is happening here. They had nothing else to watch. So, is it really fictional? Does it make any difference? I don't think so. I do straight photographs. I'll just show you them briefly, a couple of them briefly to prove it. These are both in the exhibition. This is called Coastal Motifs. It was made in the 80s. It's a view of Vancouver, a view of North Vancouver, in fact, from a high point. I've tried to make some comprehensive pictures of Vancouver and one or two other cities as well. They're very difficult to do. I've only managed to succeed a few times. This is called diagonal composition, and that's what it is. It's a composition on the diagonal. I didn't mean it to be a diagonal composition. I know this place. I saw this old sink, which I own, in a studio of mine, and it struck me as possible, just like any phenomenon can strike any photographer. I photographed it, and it looked best on the diagonal. The Guitarist, made in the 80s also. It's a near documentary because there's two real people who occupied a real house, my house, and played the guitar upstairs in the bedroom, and smoked. And finally, I said they could carry on only if they let me photograph them. So it is a kind of a documentary of my son Jamie in 1986 and his friend who was just learning to play the electric guitar. And of course they knew I was photographing them, but I asked them to ignore me, and that wasn't difficult for them to do, and it's not difficult for most people to do. I didn't mean it like that. I meant that it's very easy to ignore a photographer once you get used to the idea that he or she is there. It's very easy, and we do it all the time. Everybody does it. Volunteer, made in 1996. One of my earliest black and white photographs. I made transparencies up until 2007, that is for many years, but had been wanting to do other things for a long time, and by the middle of the 90s I finally had it set that I could do my own black and white prints and produce them and print them in my own darkroom. At this point, I do everything in my own studio, print all my pictures of every kind. That's the only way to get the kind of quality I want, and I've made a big effort over the decades to make that happen. Anyway, this also came from something I saw through a window of a man kind of strangely, contentedly cleaning the floor of a kind of a shelter Around my studio in Vancouver, there's a lot of these places, so they're easy for me to see. And I was captivated by his serenity and wanted to capture it somehow. And worked with a person, not the same person, worked with another person, collaborated with this person to make the picture happen. It's just, you know, some of these pictures are studies of individual worlds, let's put it that way. Worlds that really exist. Similar one, morning cleaning, Mies van der Rohe Pavilion, Barcelona. This was made in the late 90s. It's pretty obvious that it's related to the previous picture. But I did have I had the opportunity to photograph in the Barcelona Pavilion on a subject I wanted to do anywhere, not just there, which was what I wrote in my mind, I suppose, was clean the windows, cleaning windows, or maybe cleaning important windows, or maybe just cleaning large windows, something like that. It wasn't to do with this place, but it was it was to do with anywhere that had large imposing windows that needed to be kept clean. I thought the labor of keeping those windows clean had a certain kind of significance, and I wanted to capture it. I was lucky I got to use the, you know, the ultimate glass house with the ultimate important windows at the Barcelona Pavilion, and I think that's great, and it's made the picture kind of popular, but it doesn't matter. It could have been done in any place with large windows, but it began from that, and this is essentially a documentary of the cleaner at work about 7 in the morning, and it was photographed in very few minutes at 7 in the morning. So it's very much a near documentary picture. The only reason why it's not a documentary picture is because it's made up of more than one negative, and there are technical reasons for that. And in a lot of these pictures, the reason why there's more than one negative is simply because there's a technical reason for it. It doesn't have anything to do with an invention or anything like that. It's just a technical reason. There he is. Now, the rifle was made in 2000 as well, and I'll show it briefly simply because it's another example in which someone who's collaborating with me clearly is mixed in the same image with someone who's maybe not collaborating with me deliberately. And it's another one of those situations where the world keeps moving around what I'm doing, and I can make use of it. Oh, there you go. That's 51 minutes. Let me just think. Let me show you 2 more pictures and then we'll stop. How about that? Agreed? All right. I'm trying to show you a certain scope of approaches that can be woven together inside of making what's called these near documentary pictures, but you don't need to see all the examples. There's quite a few of them in the exhibition anyway. Fieldwork is, it's so near documentary that I don't know exactly, I don't have a term for it. I guess you'd have to slice it again and make it even nearer documentary, because I asked the anthropologist in the picture if I could photograph his dig in the summer of 2003. He agreed, and I barely ever talked to him during the shoots. Moreover, because the picture was taken in the morning when the sun was still coming up and hadn't flooded the forest with a tangle of shadows and brightnesses which would have made everything pretty much invisible, I only had a very few minutes to make the picture every morning anyway. So I established a stable place for my camera where I knew I could come back every day at the same time of day roughly and find pretty much the same light and be able to get something off of more than one negative if necessary. I didn't set out, I set out to photograph it in one shot, but there were so many interesting things going on between him and his collaborator that I had the opportunity to pick and choose. And so it is made up of a couple of negatives, but there is simply no intervention on my part except being there. So what is it? Lastly, in front of a nightclub, which is in the exhibition, this was made under very different circumstances where the actual location of the nightclub was not available to me. So there's certain things I had to do, and I'm not going to outline them, but you might be able to guess, or at least surmise, that I had to do in order to photograph in front of this nightclub. I was very interested in the man selling the roses. He was the trigger. He was the starting point for the picture. The man not in the crowd, whatever you want to call him. And the picture widened out and became a much bigger picture in the process of losing him, had to lose him in the crowd. Losing him in the crowd is a kind of composition work, you see. The composition, the shape of the rectangle had to become different and had to be filled with different things in order that he should be lost just to the right degree in that crowd, so that what I was trying to express, can be expressed through purely formal means. The size of things, the shape of things, the distance things are away, the colors, etc., etc. That's all we have. Okay, I'm going to show you one more because I think it's relevant. Men waiting. It's a very large picture. It's very neo-realist, I suppose, or very near-documentary. Here it is. It's not in the exhibition, so I'm showing it to you. There is a corner in Vancouver, like I'm sure there is in Toronto and everywhere else, where people who looking for day work go, and employers looking for day employees come, and they get hired. I wanted to do that picture for pretty obvious reasons. I don't know. I think it's pretty evident why someone would want to photograph the pent-up energy of men who have labor to sell, and they haven't sold it yet. And the day is just beginning, and the day is about whether they're going to sell that energy of theirs, or it's going to go to waste. That's what I wanted. But where they gathered, it wasn't going to make a picture. It wasn't going to do what I've told you. It was going to fail. So I moved it to this fantastic spot, which also is a corner, and which I looked carefully into to see that it was, in terms of the traffic patterns and how people could get to this corner in their vehicles, what the public transit was like, so that people who needed to get there in public transit could get there, etc., etc., and realized this was actually a better corner to stand on to get work than the actual one. But on top of that, it's much more beautiful. The trees, the bare tree, the low buildings, the skyline, the clouds, everything about it, you see, that has nothing to do with the men waiting for work. As such, it's a set of formal choices, but I believe that those formal choices are what brings the subject alive. And if I hadn't made those, or if we artists don't make those and don't make them successfully, the subject won't live. And if the picture doesn't energize you, then you won't experience it, you won't like it. And if you don't like the picture, it won't have any impact on you, and the subject will just disappear for you. I think by the energy and affection that people feel when they look at work that they enjoy, they change their relation to what's shown in that picture. Not in any way that can be measured or defined, but your relationship is altered for whatever, and you take that wherever you take it. You may take it nowhere, but you never really know. I'm going to stop there. I think my timer went off. I'm stopping, and I guess if there's questions, we'll have time for some. Thanks. And do we?
I would like to talk a little bit about image making. So throughout your talk, you talk about your compositions, images that were near documentary images. What are your thoughts on image generation with artificial intelligence?
I have no thoughts because artificial intelligence is not photography. Artificial intelligence, as I understand it, is a massive chain of computers that analyze existing images and do things with them. Photography takes place between a camera, which means a person equipped with a camera, and the world as it exists. That's photography. So insofar as people will, I guess if people prefer to look at a screen and talk or type in a description of an image and have it generated by a machine, that will probably lead to some new kind of image making, but it won't be photography. I don't know, I can't see. The lights are on, I can't see much.
Thank you. How do you decide whether a picture becomes a transparency or an opaque print, or both?
Well, back when I was making them, That's a good question. Since I don't haven't made transparencies for a while, I haven't had to face that decision. I began to suspend making that kind of picture because I began to get a little tired of the particular technical aspects of having to make the exposures for that kind of printing. I won't go into detail, but there are certain things about it. Got tired of that. Also began to realize, and I had realized for a long time, that there were dimensions of photographic appearance that were not available to me by making backlit images. I should also say that I sort of fell into making them in the 70s without really planning on it and found they were fascinating and ran with it. But nevertheless, I didn't think that was the be-all and end-all of what I could do. I wanted to do at least black and white printing for a long time, and as I said, I finally got into a position where I could do it in the middle of the 90s, which is quite a long time. It took me quite a long time. So at the beginning it was whether it was a black and white print and a transparency, and that was not difficult because certain pictures need to be in color and others sort of seem to need to be in black and white. I think Men Waiting needs to be in black and white, for example. I think it unifies the energy level of all the men. Like if someone was wearing red, you know, it would be a problem. If someone was wearing purple, it just wouldn't do the same thing. So you can see that it should be in black and white. From the way I looked at it, there's a common energy amongst those guys. And they're all competing to make, we won't go over it again, you get the point. So that meant the picture had to be in black and white. Black and white also is fascinating because we know that the orthochromatic film just doesn't register color, fine. That means it's just a condition of the technology. But I see it as sort of dramatic, that it's not just the failure of the film, it's also the will of the photographer to suppress color, to eliminate color, to censor oneself. If you want to even take it even stronger, you can take that as strong as you want. It's a hostility to color even that might be surfacing at that moment, not in your whole career or personality, but for some reason. And that suppression is dramatic. And so the picture itself then contains this strange difference from the world because there's no color. And that makes it very distinct and unusual. I feel like I work in photography in this gigantic sphere of sort of space, kind of like this theater if it was a sphere. And that sphere is not static. It keeps moving, and the possibilities of photography are located and drifting through a spherical space. And everything is in play, whether it's color, scale, subject, genre, equipment, whatever, is always in play. And when that subject crystallizes in that space, it magnetically attracts certain things to it. So a certain subject will kind of magnetically attract monochrome to it, and so on. And it's so it's unpredictable. And I think photography is baffling, and I think it's still socially baffling or almost existentially baffling. How does it duplicate? Photography duplicates an organ, human eye, not perfectly, but very close to. Anyway, those decisions are always made in that kind of energy space. So I just have to decide every time by what the starting point triggers. I can't see who's got their hand up from here.
Maybe I can just shout.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you, you have this artistic practice, but also this so much academic, critical, art, historical studies that you've done, and I mean, we can all see and hear how those integrate so richly in your practice. But I'm curious what that relationship, how that's evolved, just in your oeuvre. I mean, reading about, maybe you had stepped away from art making in the 70s when you were doing your PhD, and how you've kind of negotiated between those things and obviously ultimately brought them together. Thank you.
Okay, good question. I don't really know, because I did study a lot of art history, but not in an academic sense, although I went to school and took classes and all that sort of thing. I was reading books on art history when I was 10 or 11 years old. and I read the text, you know, looked at the pictures and read the text and so on. And I learned a lot about artists just on my own because I wanted to. I'm sure everybody has something that they have been doing all along just because they want to, and they know a lot about it because they want to know a lot about it. When I started doing my pictures in the 70s, I needed to have a job. I couldn't make a living from my pictures, and I essentially couldn't do that until the 2000s. And so because I found art history easy, because I knew a lot about it, I could go and get credentials without really trying very hard, which was the big plus. And so I did that in order for an ulterior purpose. But of course I loved learning about these things, so I just kept learning. And I'm still doing that. So I wrote a lot of things when I was teaching as lectures, and I would have a set of subjects, and I would write my lectures longhand with a pen 2 or 3 times a week, 10 or 11, 12 pages, and I would read them to my students because it was the easiest way to get my thoughts across. And I had a lot of thoughts at that time because I had been doing this for a long time without expressing myself. So that was interesting and kind of encouraging to think. And I think there's a lot to think about in art, a lot to intellectually think about in art. There's a lot at stake in thinking about it. I haven't talked about that today because it's not really the point, it wasn't my point, but there are stakes in play for all our thoughts about art. And the more we reflect on those and try and develop our way of thinking, the more we're going to be able to engage with that. And there can be interesting consequences from that. I didn't really write for publication for any reason except friends of mine asked me to write things for their catalogs and so on. That's all I ever did in terms of published writing. I only did it because they asked me. But as I hope I've given you the sense that when I start doing a picture, I really plunge right into the thing and I really give it my all. And so when someone asks me to write something, I do the same thing. I just get right into it and do it, sometimes without even thinking about it, and just do it. So I know if you've read some of my things, some of them are pretty long. And that's because I just got into it and did it because it was there to do. I treated it almost as if I was doing a picture, you know? So there's no real fixed relationship between those things. I've learned a lot by studying other artists. I've learned a lot by writing about them. I'm still trying to learn because I know that that learning is the same kind of irradiation of energy that you get when you just like something intensely, whether it's a picture or whatever. So learning is just sort of, to me, an irradiation of what I'm trying to do overall. But I haven't done much of it lately because no one's asked me, and I don't necessarily want to be asked. It's hard work.
I want to go back to where you started in your talk about the size of your pieces and how someone once said that the film business or motion pictures are real estate because you need a wall to show it on, and the size of the wall matters. And your work, at one point you made a choice to, I guess, be involved with your audience and put them in big spaces. What was the journey for you creatively, and then almost, I guess, business? I don't want to go too much into an area you don't want to talk about, but you had to find big walls. And what was your relationship with such large pieces and little pieces?
I always try to make my pictures as small as I can make them. And I'm not joking. If you see Men Waiting, or if you see the Italian garden picture I showed you, when you see it in the gallery, in order to understand, or even apprehend, or let's say appreciate, whatever, they're all related. In order to do those things, you need to see certain things at certain sizes. And you need to see those men's expressions in the morning. You need to see what's going on with them. That's also a photographic imperative. So in order to show that many men on that corner from that distance to get that picture, that print has to become a certain size. The size is determined in this case by what I just told you. So therefore, it can't be any smaller. It also can't be any bigger, because having it bigger would be superfluous. Having it smaller would defeat the purpose. So all my pictures are have the same criterion. They are the smallest I can make them, given what I'm trying to do. If you take something like the diagonal composition, the tiny little picture that's that big, it's in life size. And many of my larger pictures are also in life size. This is probably not, because life size would be gigantic, given the actual geometry of the lens and so on. So I do use life size a lot because there's a magic to life size. And I think painting had shown us this for a long time, that when what's depicted on a surface is at the scale of the people looking at that surface, there's an interaction between the person and the image that's unique. You know, the universe is probably in one scale, maybe, but at least the known universe appears to be in one scale. Let's call it universal scale rather than life scale. So the only scale that is really objective that we can know is that one. Everything else is either an enlargement or a miniaturization. So life scale has a kind of concrete, cosmic identity that has nothing to do with our choices. It is the only touchstone that we can use to understand what scale really is, and therefore all pictures have a relation to that scale, whether they are paying attention to it or not. So I wasn't looking for big spaces, but I knew there would be some consequences. But again, paintings have occupied big spaces for centuries, so I just didn't worry about it.
We have time for one last question.
You spoke about your influence from cinema in your work, specifically cinematography, and you cited films like White Ribbon and Akatone, and I'm curious if any of your images that we see as standalone images have ever started as sequences and by a process of illumination became a single image.
No. No, that hasn't happened. The reason that probably hasn't happened is because I won't make a sequence of images if I can help it. So, for example, to answer the question, there was a couple of multi-panel pieces in the show, and they were made out of a process, each was made differently, but they were made because the subject I originally started with couldn't be encompassed in one picture. I tried to keep it there because that's what I think I do. But as I said, there are no real rules, so sometimes you're compelled to make a change. But I don't do cinema. I think the important thing is cinematography is, I know it's a misleading word. I think it's not a good word, but I can't think of a better one. It's misleading, like a lot of words are anyway, but it's misleading because I don't do cinema. I've detached aspects of cinema, photography of cinema, and detach them to be used only as still photography. That's why I think what I do is just as pure photography as Walker Evans, because photography is more complex than, I'm not going to say more complex than Walker Evans thought, because I think that's a very stupid thing to say, but it's more complex than the canon at that time was interested in. That's about all I can say about it. So photography, the path to a final photographic image is complicated. It is no one way. And I'm sure that if you analyzed Evans's body of work, he probably did some things that we don't know about. We know that other so-called straight photographers also did a lot of things that we didn't know about till we found out about it later. But it doesn't make any difference. So yeah, I don't do film and I don't make paintings by other means. I've said that already. Is that it? Okay, thank you.